So a Chinese official that was connected to the government tweeted out that he thought that this virus could have been planted by the American government or the American military or the CIA, right?
Yes.
And then the Chinese government itself, like it could be an official that's gone rogue. That happens.
It's not. This is
But
Zhao Lijian, and he's with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's
interesting.
not rogue.
But okay, but even if you had, you would think that the Chinese government itself, Xi Jinping, could make a correction on this,
Correct.
because you could have somebody kind of bark really loud and you play
Right.
good cop, bad cop, but they haven't even done that.
No.
Interesting. And so I think, is
It's
that
so
why
blatant.
that's so blatant? Why is that not being covered more? I mean, that it seems to be a footnote when that ought to be a headline.
You mean covered by the Western press or
Yes.
covered by?
Covered by the Western press.
I mean, so the at least what's considered right-wing media here in the U.S., we've covered that, right? Like you do see it on Fox News a lot. You do see it on Daily Wire and all these other right-wing sources. It was eventually picked up by everybody else, but it took a while. Generally, the people like Fox and Tucker Carlson were on this beat much far ahead of the mainstream media.
Okay. So it is. So it's being covered to a degree.
To a degree.
Okay. So as far as what seems to be trending a bit right now is the defunding of the WHO. So it looks like, and we did a show on Myth Informed where I cited a lot of Jennifer Zhang's research on the timeline of this, and she makes an incredibly powerful case that China was aware, the Chinese government officials were aware of human-to-human transmission weeks before they let anyone know, or possibly even months. So, and the WHO seemed to just buy the party line. They didn't investigate China. They don't respond to Taiwan, who's trying to send them messages. Was that a smart call to defund the WHO? And it seems like Bill Gates, for example, mentioned, this is the wrong time to defund the WHO, right in the middle of a pandemic. This is terrible. What are your thoughts?
So just a little bit about the mechanics of something like defunding an organization. I mentioned this before, that in the NGO world, funds are usually pre-committed. The last, the current fiscal year has already been paid for. And this announcement that Trump came out saying that he wants to defund the WHO doesn't mean that this year's funding is immediately pulled. By the way, this would also have to involve Congress if he were to do that. If he were to actually pull this year's funding from the WHO, you would have to involve Congress. But this is about not renewing the $400 million or so that American taxpayer actually fund the WHO for next fiscal year. So I don't think it actually disrupts operations this year. But on the other hand, we've had so much evidence in the past few months that the WHO has essentially become an extension of the Chinese Communist Party. You're right, it has started. If you follow the timeline, it looks particularly incriminating. About 31st of December, that is, New Year's Eve of last year, that the Taiwanese government had actually warned the WHO, hey, we are hearing about human-to-human transmission from our doctors who are talking to their mainland colleagues. And how did the mainland colleagues know? Because staff members in hospitals were starting to fall ill. That's how you know that is the fastest sign to detect something like human-to-human transmission. And instead of acting on that information, the WHO completely ignored it. But not only ignored it, but 2 weeks later on January 14th, actually tweeted, there is no evidence for human-to-human transmission. The question is, why would they do something like that? And the answer is, at the time, they were trying to appease China's line to prevent the world from barring travel from China. So whilst China was barring travel out of Wuhan to the other parts of their own country, they were saying to the world, there is no need to lock down travel between your country and our country. They wanted travel to keep going on. I mean, this would also make them look bad. And the WHO, instead of pushing back, as they did 2003, they actually did a really good job with SARS. It was a different head of the WHO, it's not the current one. They locked down travel pretty quickly after SARS emerged, and issued this travel directive. and somehow this time around completely failed to do so. So it's and there was a study I think by the University of Southampton that said that if the world had acted 3 weeks earlier, 95% of the global spread would have been prevented.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that one, and Jennifer, this piece has talked about that as well. What is in it? Like, this is speculation. What is in it for the Chinese government? Let's say that they were aware, even in, say, mid-December, that in fact they had a virus on their hands with human to human transmission. Like, why try to cover it up? Like, it seems like, isn't this going to get out anyways? And what's in it for them versus, okay, let's stop travel, let's kind of lock the country down. Is that disastrous to them economically?
There's a few, forces at play. I think one thing that was definitely happening was there are different layers of government even in the within the Chinese Communist Party. You had the provincial governments, so like the local government of Wuhan, and then you have their Politburo, their federal level, right? Like the main Chinese Communist Party that is situated in Beijing. And so there is a sense of there was tension between the local governments and the federal government, actually in the same way that we kind of have it too here in the US with state governments and the federal. And so there's a good, there's some evidence that this kind of tension was happening, and the local government of Hubei province did not want to admit that something was happening in their city. So they submitted a report, I think on January 7th to the party congress, and in that report did not say anything about what was going on. They already knew by that time that there were cases of mysterious pneumonia, but they did not alert Beijing at the time. And it's because they were afraid to look bad. And also, actually, during this time, China had a law that said that any communication about outbreaks have to be approved by the party before they can be made official. So this is another layer. So because when you're a totalitarian, authoritarian government, you're always concerned about legitimacy, especially outside legitimacy, credibility. And that's why China wanted so badly to be seen by the world as having, their government be legitimate. And and there's nothing that pokes at your legitimacy more than having your reputation completely assailed because you bungled this response, because you didn't act early. So it's better to sweep it under the rug. I mean, I think at the time, frankly, they also had no idea how bad this was going to be. Their instinct is to just hope it, just close your eyes and just hope it goes away.
And because it's like a top-down institution, do you get some of the mistakes that, say, a repressive like Stalinist regime would have, where every person is overinflating their production numbers on everything, so you end up with a famine because they think they have more food than they actually do, coming from the communist farms? And was it the same thing with China, that every single governor and province head is underreporting what's going on? No, that's not a problem here.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so are clearly the federal numbers, like the actual numbers that they are submitting to the WHO. How come all of a sudden their epi curves? We're talking about like their curve really looking like completely exceptional. Like no other part of the world, even countries like Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and South Korea that did a really good job flattening their curves, it looked nothing like what China's did, which is all of a sudden you had this exponential growth, and then you had flatlining like almost immediately with just no in between. I made this joke saying, like, if you were going to fudge your numbers, always try to make it realistic. Like, this is something that we all learned when we were copying our friends' homework answers, right?
Yeah.
But it's gotten to the point where either they don't care, or they're trying to use this as a way to say, look, China is exceptional. We were able to weld people into their apartments, and we achieved the impossible. We completely got rid of new cases. This is evidence for the supremacy of the Chinese model. Look at all you messy democracies out there. It's clearly not effective. This is the message they want to drive home to the rest of the world. They may have started it.
And it seems like any kind of narrative, even if it's conspiracy narrative or of kind of this line that doesn't make any sense, because you're right, the math doesn't add up with their curves. But then you add this with the CIA planted this in Wuhan, so maybe does this give at least a plausible story for all of the countries that are allied with them, that are maybe in the Belt and Road Initiative, or some of their allies, something to believe? Is that the reason you do this stuff?
Yeah, it's information warfare. It's the art of that. Be, I think Kyle Bass, our interview for COVIDCon, said it best. There were three, actually probably four types of warfare. You have information warfare, you had economic warfare, and digital warfare, and now you have this, and the last step is actual warfare, like
Hot
military
war.
or kinetic warfare, they call it. And so China is engaged in all three now, right? The digital realm with the hacking and AI and all that stuff, and then they're in 5G, and then they're also involved in information warfare. And they're so good at it because they employ so many people in this department, and knowing they're kind of hacking our openness to promote their authoritarianness, and they seem to be very successful in building this narrative. And
And
when I see people here in the West saying like, "Oh, look at what China's doing. They must be doing something right." This is you're these this is people exactly doing what the Chinese were hoping.